68% of faces descend unevenly. Not unevenly across time. Everyone's face changes with age. That part is not in question. Unevenly from side to side. Left half and right half aging at measurably different rates, in different directions, producing an asymmetry by the 60s that wasn't present at 40. That number came up repeatedly in facial assessments I was reviewing, and the question it raised is one I couldn't set aside. Why would one side of a face age faster than the other? Both sides share the same skin. Both sides share the same collagen-producing cells, the same hormonal environment, the same biological clock. Gravity pulls both sides of the face downward with identical force. There is no such thing as left side gravity, no preferential pull on one half over the other. So when you pull out a photograph from 10 years ago and hold it up next to the mirror on an ordinary morning, and you can see that the fold from nostril to mouth corner is deeper on one side, that one corner of the mouth sits a few millimeters lower, that one side of the jaw has a heavier, more descended quality than the other. Something specific is creating that difference, something measurable, something that the standard story about facial aging doesn't quite reach. That question is where this investigation started. The first clue was anatomical. There is a band of connective tissue in the body that runs continuously from the outer edge of the foot, up the outside of the lower leg, through the outer knee, up the side of the thigh, across the hip, up through the side of the torso, through the obliques and the spaces between the ribs, over the shoulder, up the side of the neck, and terminates at the temporal region of the skull. The flat area above and slightly in front of the ear, on each side of the head. Not metaphorically connected, physically continuous. One uninterrupted tissue structure from the sole of your foot to the side of your head. The stretch we'll get to, let me come back to it. But first, the chain. The 60 seconds only makes sense once you follow the chain all the way from foot to temple. Without that, it's a sideways lean with nothing to explain it. With it, the geometry of what's happening in the face becomes clear. Let me trace the path specifically, because the anatomy is the evidence here. You can feel the beginning of this structure yourself. Place 2 fingers on the outer side of your calf, halfway between your ankle and your knee. Press lightly inward. The firmness you feel under your fingers isn't just muscle. It's the dense connective tissue casing around the muscle. And it doesn't stop there. It continues upward along the outer lower leg, connects through the outer aspect of the knee, and continues as a broad, fibrous band up the outer side of your thigh. Run your hand up the outside of your leg from knee to hip. That band of tissue is what you're tracing. At the hip, something that surprised me when I first mapped this structure. The tissue doesn't stop at the pelvis. It crosses the hip joint and begins climbing the side of the torso. Take your hand and rest it on your side, just below your lowest rib, fingers pointing upward. The tissue under your fingers runs from the hip bone below, up through the rib cage, all the way to the shoulder above. This is the side body, not just as a colloquial description of a region, but as an anatomically continuous structure. The outer surface of the torso, from hip to shoulder, is one connected fascial unit. Above the shoulder, the chain continues up the side of the neck, through the muscles along the outer neck, the scalenes, the edge of the large muscle running from behind the ear down to the collarbone, and then fans into the temporal region of the skull. Stop there for a moment. The temporal region, the side of your head above the ear. Most people have never had reason to think carefully about what's actually there. It's where you feel tension when you grind your teeth at night. It's where a stress headache often begins. But structurally, the temporal region is something more specific and more significant for what we're investigating. The temporal fascia is a dense, fibrous sheet covering the temporal bone, the curved bone on each side of your skull. At its upper border, it attaches to the temporal bone itself. At its lower border, it connects to the zygomatic arch, the cheekbone, the lateral frame of the face, the horizontal strut that runs outward from the cheekbone toward the ear. The tissue of the middle face hangs from and connects to this lateral frame. The fat pads that give the cheek its fullness are anchored in part to this structure. The tissue that determines the angle and position of the corner of the mouth, the deepness of the fold from nose to mouth, the position of the outer corner of the eye. These all depend on where this lateral frame sits and how much lateral and upward support it receives. The temporal fascia, under appropriate tension, provides exactly that support. A lateral and slightly superior pull on the zygomatic arch. The face sits where it anatomically belongs because something above and to the side of it is holding it there. In the temporal fascia is the terminal point of the lateral line. The chain is complete. Your outer foot connects through continuous tissue to the structural anchor of your face. My grandmother was not someone who talked about her appearance. Practical woman, precise observations, no particular interest in vanity as a topic. But I remember her, well into her 70s, standing at the kitchen counter after a long afternoon, pressing the heel of her left hand into her left side, just above the hip, into the tissue along the lower ribcage, and holding it there a moment with her eyes partly closed. I asked once what she was doing. She said without looking up, "The left side pulls." Not a complaint, a report. The way she'd note that the back gate needed a new hinge. I assumed she meant something to do with her back. I didn't ask further. Looking at photographs of her now, I can see the asymmetry clearly. By her late 60s, the left side of her face sat roughly a centimeter lower than the right. The fold from nostril to mouth corner was deeper on the left. The outer corner of the left eye had a different quality, heavier, slightly more descended, the lid carrying a slightly greater weight of tissue. And in nearly every photograph where her upper body was visible, her left shoulder sat fractionally higher than the right. Not conspicuously, just consistently, across every photo in the collection, across decades. I did not connect those two observations, the left side of her face lower, the left shoulder higher, for a long time. When I did, it reoriented several things I had been observing clinically, but not yet fully connecting. The pattern across people with visible unilateral facial descent is more consistent than chance predicts. The side that has descended further tends to map to the side with greater lateral line restriction, greater tissue tension in the outer hip and ribcage, less range of motion when the torso tries to lean and lengthen to that side. One side of the body is, in a functional sense, shorter than the other. The tissue won't fully lengthen, can't reach its neutral resting length. In the face on that shortened side has descended further. There's a practical check that demonstrates this correlation in most adults over 50. Stand in front of a mirror, arms hanging completely relaxed at your sides. Don't adjust, don't correct, just let the posture be whatever the body defaults to. Look at where your fingertips fall. In a significant proportion of adults, the fingertips on one side sit several centimeters closer to the floor than the other. One arm hangs measurably longer. This is not a difference in arm length. The bones are the same length on both sides. It reflects a difference in the length of the tissue along the trunk. The side with the shorter resting lateral line holds the torso slightly higher on that side, or the opposite side hangs slightly longer, or some combination of both. Check which side is different. Then look at the face directly above it. The asymmetry maps. Not perfectly, not every time, but consistently enough to be clinically informative. The side with greater lateral compression tends to be the side where facial descent is further advanced. The body is showing you the same pattern from two different levels. When I assessed lateral trunk mobility before examining someone's face, checking how far the torso could lengthen and lean to each side, the asymmetry in lateral line restriction predicted with reasonable frequency which side of the face showed greater descent. The clinical observation was strong enough to be practically useful, which meant the correlation wasn't accidental. Something causal was connecting them. Everything I've traced so far, the lateral line's path from foot to temporal region, its connection to the structural anchor of the face, the clinical pattern linking lateral body restriction to the direction of facial descent, connects through one fascial system that I mapped out in full in the Connected Face protocol. It's a 30-day plan built around 12 targeted releases, including a more extended version of the lateral work this video is building toward. Each exercise has a labeled diagram showing you precisely where to place your hands, and there's a daily tracking sheet so you can observe your own changes over time. You'll find it in the description and the pinned comment. The standard explanation for why faces age asymmetrically, the one you'd find in most aesthetic medicine literature, focuses on several well-documented mechanisms. Fat pad migration. The small, discrete pockets of fat distributed throughout the face shift with gravity over years. Skin laxity. Collagen and elastin reduction allows the skin to lose resilience. SMAS changes. The structural support layer becomes less mechanically robust with age. These mechanisms are real. The research supporting them is solid, and I'm not dismissing any of it. The gap is what this explanation cannot account for. If the cause of facial descent is intrinsic to the face, located within the skin, the fat pads, the SMAS, why would one side descend faster than the other? Both sides of the face are in the same biological environment. Collagen breaks down across both sides at essentially the same rate. Fat pads don't preferentially migrate on the left. The SMAS doesn't atrophy faster on one side of a face unless there's an asymmetric mechanical reason driving it. The asymmetry in the face demands an asymmetric cause. An intrinsic cause, one located entirely within the face itself, cannot produce a left-right difference unless the face itself is being acted on differently from outside. And the only structure consistently different on the two sides of a body is the lateral line. How long it is, how restricted, how much tension it carries at rest. The evidence pointed toward the body, not the face. My mother tried several facial interventions over her 50s and 60s, thoughtfully, without urgency, with what I describe as calibrated hope rather than desperation. A good retinol regimen maintained carefully for years, a course of microcurrent sessions with a skilled practitioner, eventually some targeted injections administered by a physician she trusted, placed with precision at specific points along the left side of her face where the descent was more pronounced. Each intervention produced genuine improvement. I watched it. The treated side looked better, less descended, the fold shallower, the corner of the mouth sitting at a more neutral angle. The physician was skilled, the products were real. Within 6 months of each intervention, the asymmetry had returned. Both sides looked somewhat improved compared to where they'd started. The interventions weren't without lasting effect, but the left side of her face had descended back to approximately where it had been. The asymmetry reconstituted itself. The underlying pattern was unaffected. Nobody involved in her treatment, not once, across years of careful appointments, ever asked about her posture. Never noted that she habitually sat with her left hip braced slightly higher than the right, a compensation that had developed after a left knee injury in her mid-40s and never fully resolved. Never observed that she carried her bag exclusively on the left shoulder. Never assessed the tissue along her left outer hip and ribcage. The interventions were targeting the face, which was showing the effect. The cause was in the body, which was never examined. Let me go back to the temporal fascia. Let me start further down actually, and approach it from the hip, where the loading pattern becomes easiest to see, and trace upward from there. The temporal fascia makes more sense with the whole chain in view. At the hip, the lateral line carries the accumulated tension from everything below it. The outer foot, the lower leg, the outer thigh, all of it contributing to the overall load the tissue is under. When someone has habitually greater tension in the right lateral hip, it isn't just the hip tissue that's involved. That tension propagates upward through the connected chain. The tissue along the right side of the ribcage is under greater tension. The tissue from the ribcage to the shoulder is under greater tension. The tissue along the right side of the neck is under greater tension. Each link in the chain carries the load of everything below it. By the time that tension reaches the temporal fascia, it is accumulated through the entire lateral chain below. The temporal fascia on the right side is under greater inferior pull, pulled downward by the tight tissue running down through the neck and shoulder and ribcage to the hip. Not acutely, not dramatically, chronically, at low load, continuously. The temporal fascia provides, and this is worth being specific about, the temporal fascia provides lateral support to the zygomatic arch. The direction of pull is lateral and slightly upward under normal conditions, holding the lateral frame of the face in position. When the temporal fascia is under inferior tension from the chain below it, that normal lateral and upward support gets partially replaced by an inferior component. The anchor is being pulled downward instead of maintained neutrally. The face tissue attached to that anchor follows. There's a structural quality to how tissue responds to chronic low-load tension that's easy to miss if you're only thinking about acute forces. Fascia doesn't respond primarily to intense, brief loads. It responds to sustained, low-level loads maintained over time. A strong, brief pull produces minimal lasting change. A gentle, persistent pull over months and years reshapes the tissue's resting position. Chronic restriction and chronic fascial shortening work the way a slow stock reduction works in a kitchen, imperceptibly in the moment, but unmistakably altered given enough time. The temporal fascia, under chronic inferior tension from a tight lateral chain, doesn't dramatically tear or acutely shift. It gradually accommodates. Its resting position shifts slightly inferior over time. The anchor it provides to the lateral frame of the face shifts with it, and the face tissue, depending on that anchor, descends. That is why the descent on one side progresses faster than the other. It's tracking the restriction in the lateral chain on that side. Now, I need to be precise about something. The tissue becomes, tight isn't quite the right word for what's happening, abbreviated, shortened from its neutral resting length. The distinction matters because it changes what the intervention looks like. You can't forcibly stretch a tight structure from outside without risk. But you can offer a sustained lengthening load to a tissue that is settled into a shortened resting position and allow it to return toward its neutral length over time. That's the functional difference between stretching and releasing. The lateral stretch works through the second mechanism, not the first. The sources of asymmetric lateral loading are worth understanding because they determine which side needs the additional attention and why the pattern develops in the first place. The most common source is dominant hand loading. If you're right-handed, your right side of the body typically carries greater cumulative load, more gripping, more reaching and pulling, more lateral compression from lifting and carrying. Over decades, the right lateral line in a right-handed person tends toward greater restriction. This is consistent with why, in populations with visible unilateral facial descent, the right side descends more frequently in right-handed individuals. The correlation isn't absolute, but it's reliable enough to be a useful starting point. The second source is sleep position. If you habitually sleep on the same side, and most people do, often for decades, without much variation, the lateral line on that side experiences sustained compression during the hours of rest. 6 to 8 hours per night of one-sided compression, every night, for 20 or 30 years. The tissue on that side gradually loses its full resting length. The effect is slow enough to be invisible at the level of any single night, but compounded over years, the asymmetry it produces becomes visible. The third source is postural compensation from old injuries. My grandmother pressing into her left side, my mother's left knee, a sprained ankle in the 30s that altered gait for a year and calcified into a body weight distribution pattern that was never revisited. A shoulder injury that changed how the arm was held at rest. Compensations are efficient. The body solves the mechanical problem of an injury quickly and moves on. The compensation doesn't feel like a compensation after the first few weeks. It feels like neutral posture, and it persists indefinitely unless something interrupts it. When any combination of these sources has operated long enough on one side of the lateral chain, the tissue along that outer hip, outer rib cage, inside of the neck settles into a shortened resting position. It's under chronic load, and it accommodates that load by contracting toward it. The chain is shorter on that side than on the other. And at the terminal point of the shorter chain, the temporal fascia, the anchoring support for that side of the face, is under chronic inferior tension. The full mechanism then, asymmetric lateral loading over years creates asymmetric lateral line restriction. The restricted side of the lateral chain is shorter at rest than the opposite side. That shorter chain exerts chronic inferior tension on the temporal fascia at its terminal point. The temporal fascia on the restricted side provides less lateral and upward support to the zygomatic arch, the lateral frame of the face. The face tissue anchored to that frame receives less support on the restricted side. Over years, that tissue descends further on the restricted side than on the supported side. The asymmetry you see in the photograph from 10 years ago, the side that looks further along, the fold that's deeper, the corner that sits lower, the jaw that looks heavier on one side. That is the face reading back to you the state of the body below it. Your grandmother pressing into her left side of the kitchen counter after long afternoons. Your mother watching careful interventions dissolve within months. Both of them working on the effect without knowing the cause existed. You're in a different position. The mechanism is visible now. The intervention that changes the trajectory of facial asymmetry is not a facial intervention. It's a body intervention. It targets the lateral chain specifically, restoring the full resting length of the lateral line on the restricted side, so the temporal fascia on that side is no longer under chronic inferior tension. The intervention takes 60 seconds. Here's exactly how to perform it. Stand freely with your feet hip-width apart, or stand near a wall if you want light support. Take your right arm and reach it directly overhead, palm facing inward toward your head. Don't lean yet, just reach the arm as far upward as it naturally extends, and notice what happens as you do. The right continuing output B, picking up mid-sentence in the protocol section. Right side of your ribcage lifts and lengthens as the arm extends. And if you're paying attention, you'll feel the skin and the tissue underneath it draw upward along that flank. That's the lateral chain being asked to lengthen. Now, keeping that arm reaching upward, let your torso tip gently to the left. Not a deep bend, not a forceful stretch, just enough lateral lean that you feel the right side of your body open like a book. Your left hand can rest on your hip, or if you're near a wall, you can let your left palm find the surface for balance. Hold this position. Not for a count of 5, not for a quick in and out. Hold it for a slow count of 20 seconds, breathing normally. And as you hold it, bring your attention specifically to 3 points along that right side chain. The outer hip, the outer ribs at the level of your lower ribs, and the side of your neck just above the collarbone. You are not trying to force length into any one of those points. You are giving the whole chain permission to lengthen as a single continuous structure, the way a rope slackens along its entire length when you stop pulling on one end. After 20 seconds, release slowly. Bring the arm down with control. Don't let it drop. Stand for a moment and notice the right side of your face, not by touching it, just by attention. Many people report an almost immediate sensation of lightness along the temple and cheek on that side, a kind of loosening that wasn't there 30 seconds earlier. That sensation is not imagined. It's the temporal fascia responding to the release of tension that had been transmitted up the chain for years, in some cases decades. Now repeat on the other side. Reach your left arm overhead, palm inward, and let your torso lean to the right. Hold for the same 20 seconds. This side matters just as much as the first, even if you already know from the photograph, from the mirror, from what you've noticed about your own asymmetry, that one side needs this more than the other. The unrestricted side still benefits from maintained length. Tissue that is not under chronic load can still shorten from disuse, and you want both sides of the lateral chain functioning at their full resting length, not just the more compromised one. This is the entire protocol. 60 seconds, once through both sides. And here is what I need you to understand about frequency, because this is where most people either underuse a good intervention or overuse it into irrelevance. You do not need to perform this 6 times a day. You do not need 30 repetitions per side, held for 2 minutes each, morning and night, the way certain online routines will tell you. The lateral chain is not a muscle you are trying to fatigue and rebuild. It is a fascial structure you are trying to return to its natural resting length. And fascia responds to consistent, moderate signal over time, not to intensity and not to volume. Once a day, ideally at a consistent time, so the tissue receives a repeated signal rather than sporadic ones, is enough. Some people do it in the morning as part of getting dressed. Some people do it at night, standing at the sink before bed. The timing matters less than the consistency. What you should expect and on what timeline is worth being precise about, because vague promises are how this entire field lost credibility in the first place. In the first 1 to 2 weeks, most people notice a subjective sensation, the lightness I mentioned, sometimes described as the face sitting differently, particularly in the hour or so after performing the stretch. This is not the structural change. This is the tissue responding to acute release of tension, the way your shoulders feel different immediately after you finally stretch a muscle you'd been guarding for hours. It fades. It comes back with the next chronic loading pattern, sitting at a desk, carrying a bag, standing at a counter. This is expected, and it's not evidence that the intervention isn't working. It's evidence that the intervention is treating a chronic pattern, and chronic patterns don't resolve from one application. Between 3 and 6 weeks of daily practice, the subjective sensation tends to extend. The lightness lasts longer between sessions. The acute release starts to feel like a baseline rather than a temporary event. This is the intermediate signal that the resting length of the chain is beginning to shift, not just the acute tension. Somewhere between 8 and 12 weeks, for most people practicing consistently, a photograph taken under the same lighting, same angle, same expression as one taken at the start will show a measurable difference in the asymmetry. Not a dramatic one, not the kind of before and after that gets used to sell something. A quiet one, the fold slightly less deep, the corner sitting slightly higher, the jawline slightly more even between the two sides. The kind of difference that a stranger wouldn't notice, but that you will notice instantly because you know exactly what you were looking at before. I want to be honest about something else, because I think honesty is the only thing that separates a mechanism worth understanding from another routine you'll abandon in 3 weeks, like the 50 before it. This will not fully resolve severe, long-standing asymmetry on its own. If the loading pattern that created the restriction is still active, if you're still sleeping on the same side every night, still carrying the same bag on the same shoulder, still standing at the same counter with the same posture, the chain will keep reshortening between sessions. The stretch is necessary, but it's fighting an ongoing cause, not a historical one. Which means the real intervention has 2 parts, and I've only given you one of them so far. The second part is noticing the pattern. Not eliminating it entirely. Most of us aren't going to change which shoulder our bag sits on out of pure willpower, and that's fine. But noticing it changes its grip on you. If you carry a bag, switch which shoulder it sits on through the day, even if you default back to the dominant one. If you sleep consistently on one side, even 10 minutes on your back before you fall asleep gives the chain a different signal than 8 straight hours of the same compression. If you stand at a counter with your weight consistently shifted to one hip, and most people do this, it's not a flaw, it's just how bodies find comfortable resting positions. Occasionally shift the weight to the other side while you're doing the dishes or waiting for coffee. None of this requires vigilance. It requires awareness, which is a much lighter thing to carry than vigilance. And awareness is enough to slow the reshortening so the 60-second stretch each day can actually keep pace with it. I want to go back to the mechanism one more time, because there's a piece of it that explains something you've probably experienced and never had language for. You know the feeling, at the end of a long day, of your face looking tired in a way that isn't about the eyes or the skin. A kind of heaviness, a settling, as though gravity has had more of a say in your face's shape by 6 in the evening than it did at 7 in the morning. Most explanations for this involve fluid retention or muscle fatigue or simply the accumulated visual evidence of a long day. Those aren't wrong, but they're incomplete. Over the course of a day, your postural patterns compound. You've been sitting, standing, carrying, leaning, hour after hour of the same asymmetric loading. And the lateral chain shortens progressively through the day the way it shortens progressively through years, just on a faster time scale. By evening, the temporal fascia is under more inferior tension than it was in the morning, because the chain beneath it has spent all day accumulating shortening it didn't have at 7 a.m. That's why the 60-second stretch for many people becomes something they reach for not just once a day, but occasionally in the evening too, almost instinctively, the way you'd roll your shoulders after hours at a desk. You don't need to schedule that second application. Your body, once it understands what the sensation means, tends to ask for it on its own. There's a question I get constantly at this point, and I want to answer it directly instead of dancing around it. Does this work on both sides equally, or does it only help the side that's already restricted? The honest answer is that it restores length wherever length has been lost, and it maintains length wherever length is already adequate. It does not create asymmetry, and it does not overcorrect a normal, healthy side into becoming the new short one. Fascia doesn't work like a muscle you can overtrain into imbalance with a single daily stretch. You would need to load it asymmetrically, chronically, for years, the same way the original restriction was created to produce a new one. 60 seconds of symmetric bilateral stretching is not a chronic asymmetric load. It's the opposite of the thing that caused the problem in the first place. I also want to address something that sits underneath all of this, which is, why hasn't this been the standard explanation offered to you before now? Why did your mother spend money on interventions that dissolved within months, targeting the face directly, when the actual lever was 3 feet below the chin the entire time? I don't think this is a conspiracy. And I don't think the people offering those interventions were being dishonest with the information they had. I think it's a structural blind spot in how the face has been studied. The face is examined by people who specialize in the face: dermatologists, estheticians, cosmetic practitioners. And the body is examined by people who specialize in the body: physical therapists, movement specialists, orthopedists. The fascial continuity between the two, the lateral line running from hip to temple as one uninterrupted structure, falls into the gap between those specialties. Nobody whose training stops at the collarbone is going to trace a facial asymmetry down to a hip loading pattern. And nobody whose training stops at the shoulders is going to trace a hip pattern up into facial support. The mechanism isn't secret. It's just been sitting in the seam between two fields that don't often talk to each other. That seam is closing, slowly, as fascial research becomes its own specialty rather than a subfield borrowed from orthopedics on one side and dermatology on the other. But you don't need to wait for that convergence to become common knowledge or standard practice. You have the mechanism now. You have the 60-second protocol now. You have the timeline of what to expect and when to expect it. What you do with the next photograph, the one you'll take in 90 days if you choose to, is no longer a mystery the way your grandmother's or your mother's was. I think about your grandmother sometimes, pressing her palm into her left side at that kitchen counter, decade after decade, feeling something without a name for it. She never got the mechanism. She got the sensation, and she got the discomfort, and she got the eventual asymmetry in the mirror, and none of it was ever connected for her into a single explainable thread. Your mother got a little further. She got interventions, even if they were aimed at the wrong end of the chain, even if they dissolve faster than the pattern that caused the problem in the first place. And you're standing at the end of both of their unanswered questions, holding the actual thread that connects a kitchen counter to a temple, a bag on a shoulder to a jawline, a decade of quiet compensation to a face in a mirror. Reach your arm overhead, lean, hold for 20 seconds, switch sides. That's the whole intervention. And it costs you a minute a day. What it's actually doing, restoring length to a chain your grandmother never knew existed, releasing tension at a point your mother never thought to look, is the part worth remembering, long after the 60 seconds are over and you've gone back to your day. Take the photograph now, under whatever light happens to be in the room today. Not because today's photograph will look dramatically different from yesterday's. It won't. Take it because it's the last photograph you'll ever take without knowing what's underneath the asymmetry in it. Every one after this one, you'll be looking at with the mechanism already in view. And here's what nobody tells you about that first photograph. It won't be dramatic, but it will be honest in a way none of your other photographs have been. Every selfie you've taken for the last several years has been filtered through some version of hope or dread, hoping the angle would be forgiving, dreading that it wouldn't, tilting your chin a half inch to hide the side that's dropped lower, finding the light that smooths instead of the light that reveals. This one, you take flat. Overhead bulb, bathroom mirror, no filter, no tilt. You're not trying to look good in it, you're trying to see it. Actually see the thing you've been managing around for years without naming. Some of you will look at that first photograph and feel nothing in particular. That's fine. That's actually the more common response. And it doesn't mean the asymmetry isn't there. It means you've gotten so used to compensating for it that your eye has stopped registering it as unusual. You've built an entire visual vocabulary around your own face that quietly excludes the thing that's off. You know which side to angle toward the camera. You know which earring sits higher and have stopped noticing why. You know that one side of your smile arrives a fraction of a second after the other, and you file that under personality instead of under mechanism. The photograph doesn't change any of that on day one. It just becomes the fixed point you'll measure everything else against. Here's what the 90-day version usually looks like, based on what people report back. It's not a jawline that snaps into perfect bilateral symmetry. Bodies don't work that way, and anyone promising you that outcome from a stretch is selling you something. What changes is subtler and honestly more convincing because of how ordinary it feels from the inside. The tightness you'd stopped noticing because you'd had it for so long, that low-grade pull along one side of the neck, that sensation of one cheek sitting slightly heavier than the other by the end of a long day starts to loosen. Not because the stretch is targeting the fascia in your face directly, but because the tension traveling up from the hip and shoulder has finally stopped arriving. You're not fixing the face. You're turning off the tap that was pulling on it. People describe the change in strange, specific ways, and I want to share a few of them because they're more honest than any before and after photo could be. One woman told me the first thing she noticed wasn't visual at all. It was that she stopped unconsciously touching her jaw during phone calls, a habit she'd had for years without realizing it was a response to a persistent low ache she'd never bothered mentioning to anyone, including herself. Another told me his glasses started sitting differently on his face, more evenly, and he assumed at first that the frames had warped until he realized it was his face that had shifted, not the metal. A third said her makeup routine changed without her deciding to change it. She'd used a heavier concealer on one side for years to correct for a shadow cast by asymmetric structure, and one day she reached for it out of habit and realized she didn't need it anymore, that the shadow had softened enough that the correction was correcting for nothing. None of these are dramatic transformations. None of them would make a compelling thumbnail, but all of them are the honest texture of what fascial release actually produces. Not a new face, but a face returning closer to whatever its structure was doing before decades of one-sided loading pulled it somewhere else. That's a different kind of promise than the ones you're used to hearing, and I'd rather give you the smaller, truer one than the bigger, false one. Let's talk about the exceptions, because there always are some, and pretending otherwise would be its own kind of dishonesty. Not everyone who does the 60-second stretch every day for 90 days sees a measurable shift in the mirror. Some people see it in 30 days. Some people need 6 months. Some people are dealing with an asymmetry that has a different primary driver entirely. A dental occlusion issue, a previous injury, a structural difference present since birth. And for those people, the myofascial chain is a contributing factor, but not the whole story. And the stretch alone won't resolve what needs a broader approach. If you've done the stretch consistently for 4 months and see genuinely nothing, that's useful information, not failure. It tells you the asymmetry you're looking at is being driven by something other than, or in addition to, the chain we've been discussing. And that's worth bringing to someone who can actually look at your specific structure rather than a general mechanism explained in a video. But for the majority, and this is not a small majority, it's the overwhelming pattern reported across the people who've actually done this consistently rather than for 3 days and quit. The 60-second stretch does what fascial release is supposed to do. It doesn't cure anything because there was never a disease to cure. It restores length and glide to tissue that had been shortened and stuck by years of asymmetric loading. And when that tissue restores, everything downstream of it, including your face, stops being pulled somewhere it wasn't meant to sit. I want to go back for a moment to the phone. to the bag, to the desk setup you've probably never once considered as a contributing factor to how your face looks. Because nobody ever told you the two were connected. This is the part I actually want you to walk away with, more than the stretch itself, more than the 90-day timeline, more than any of it. The stretch undoes damage, but it doesn't stop new damage from accumulating if you go right back to the same one-sided patterns that caused it in the first place. If you carry your bag on the same shoulder every single day for the next 10 years, the 60-second stretch will be fighting a losing battle against an ongoing insult. It'll blunt the damage, it won't eliminate the cause. So here's the second half of this, the part that doesn't fit neatly into a 60-second protocol because it's not a single motion. It's an awareness you carry through an ordinary day. Switch the shoulder your bag rides on. Not obsessively, not with anxiety, just notice and alternate. Notice which hip you rest your weight on while you're standing in line, brushing your teeth, waiting for coffee, and let the other one take a turn. Notice which side you cradle your phone against your ear on, if you still do that, and switch it. None of these adjustments cost you anything. None of them require equipment or time you don't have. They just require the same thing the stretch requires, knowing that the mechanism exists, so that a pattern you've been running unconsciously for decades finally has the chance to become a pattern you're running with awareness. And awareness is the only thing that ever interrupts a habit that old. Your grandmother didn't have this awareness, not because she lacked the intelligence for it, but because nobody had connected the dots for her yet. The connection didn't exist in the medical conversation she had access to. Your mother had slightly more of the picture, enough to seek treatment, not enough to seek the right treatment. And so she spent money and time chasing symptoms at the surface while the actual mechanism kept running underneath, undisturbed, decade after decade, exactly the way it had in the generation before her. You are the first one in that line who gets to hold the whole picture at once. The mechanism, the intervention, the maintenance, the timeline, all of it, in a form small enough to fit into 60 seconds of your day and specific enough that you're not guessing at what you're doing or why. That's not nothing. That's the entire difference between 3 generations of women pressing their palms into the same ache without a name for it, and you standing in front of a mirror with a name for it, a cause for it, and a 60-second answer for it that costs you less time than it took to read this sentence. Take the photograph, do the stretch, switch the shoulder, and in 90 days, take the photograph again, under the same light, in the same mirror, at the same angle you refused to tilt away from the first time. Compare it, not to some airbrushed ideal you've never actually seen achieved in real life, but to the honest, unfiltered version of your own face that you captured today. That comparison is the only one that was ever going to mean anything. Everything else, the filters, the flattering angles, the concealer applied heavier on one side out of habit, was just you managing a mechanism you didn't yet have a name for. Now you do.